Welcome to the Real Chili Podcast.
And the Golden Eagles of Marquette University in Milwaukee are bound for the Final Four for only the third time ever.
5 seconds left. Marquette down by one, trying to avoid the upset. Blue the drive, the left hand. It's good. 1 second to play. Vander Blue has put Marquette in front by one.
And I want to win every day as basketball players, as students, and I want to win every day, most importantly, as people.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Real Chili Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lavender. I'm joined by Pete Mohan and Brian Henry, and two special guests today. Before the loss to Providence, which we'll talk about in a little bit, Marquette got one of its biggest wins in years, and undoubtedly the biggest win of Steve Wojciechowski's era. To cap off that win, there was a terrific game call from two Marquette Radio announcers on the Marquette Radio broadcast. We have Kellan Buddy and John Steppe on the show today. Before we bring them on and have a conversation with them, I wanted to play the call just so you have the context. Take a listen, relive the moment.
8 seconds left. Brunson brings that down. He drives up. That one's no good. Marquette gets the rebound, and the champions have gone down. And the court is filled with Marquette students. Marquette has beaten Villanova 74-72.
Down goes number one.
It's an amazing call. I can't stop replaying it. One of the best calls. Fellas, Kellan and John, welcome to the Real Chili Podcast. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
First question off the top. The first thing that jumps into my mind is there's 10.4 seconds left. Villanova's got the ball. Jalen Brunson starts bringing it up the court. What's going through your head? Are you thinking about what you're going to say? Are you just purely in reaction mode with what's happening on the floor?
I think it was purely reactional, not really knowing what to expect, and I was kind of really tense. My heart was beating out of my chest the entire time. I was really jittery and stuff, and so I think it was kind of just all in the moment.
And I would agree with that, too. The thought of Marquette actually winning that game popped into my head, I think, once as I was leaving my dorm. I think it's like at 6:31 when they were down, 13 points. The fact that with those last few seconds, actually Marquette having a chance, I was not expecting that at all.
And I think your two reactions to it, one, your heart beating out of your chest, and two, leaving your dorm earlier that morning, thinking there's no way in hell Marquette gets a win like this, I think is pretty representative of how we all felt. No one thought we'd get this win. And in that moment, you're so tense with 10 seconds left, and you can hear it in both your voices. It comes across as sheer joy, sheer shock. You're almost not believing what you're seeing as the students rush the court.
We were all braced for overtime, I think.
Yeah.
I was ready for it. I mean, to be honest, that entire moment was just so surreal. After when, the court is just full of people and John and I are, kind of ending up the broadcast, I can't keep myself from smiling, and I'm just covering my mouth with my hands. I'm just so in shock. It was unbelievable.
And we're all glad that you didn't have to make the call of Jenkins tips it in to tie the game.
Yeah, right.
What I was so impressed by with the whole thing, and you guys both alluded to it, is the fact that it did convey the sheer surprise and shock that kind of built up over the last 3 years. Because you guys are, just give some context, Mike, I can't remember if you said at the top, did you say what years these two are?
I didn't. Kellan's a senior, and John, you're a freshman, correct?
Yep.
So John especially, but Kellan, even as a senior, that's the biggest win you've seen in your 4 years, correct?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
So the fact that that was able to come through the microphone, I thought was spectacular. What I wanted to ask you, obviously because we couldn't hear it except for the last segment of the call, how did you guys handle the impromptu timeout due to the scorekeeping error? Because I'm curious how your tones would have changed. Was there any, as you described that to the crowd, was there a sense of, I cannot believe we just gave them a free timeout, and how would that have affected the final call and as you finished it?
We weren't really thinking about it going in as just so much in the moment. I would say the most was just confusion because there wasn't that many great indicators of what was going on at the time. So it was just as much for us figuring out what was going on. And it seemed like that break just went by so quickly. And the point that I was making more was less of, wow, we just gave them a free timeout. Wow, this is the most anxiety-provoking official review probably this year.
Right. Wasn't really expecting, that kind of error with the clock operation. that seems to be a thing they do at the Bradley Center nowadays. But at first we didn't know what was happening. Finally realized that, Jalen hadn't touched the ball yet, and that's a crucial point, and I'm not entirely sure how many seconds ran off the clock before they fixed that error. I think it was like 2 or 3 seconds. Those 2 or 3 seconds that ran off, obviously, a pivotal kind of time swing, in the final seconds of the game, and that final moment lost a little bit of intensity, but it came back. The second the whistle blew and the ball was inbounded, it was back at it. And I think it would have been the same call either way. What comes out of our mouths might have been different, but I think emotion-wise it would have still been the same thing.
I got a couple questions for you guys. First off, how mobbed was it around the media table? I mean, were there people pouring in like behind you guys, or like how quickly were you guys just consumed by the crowd back there? Or are you guys upstairs?
By the suite level. So
oh, okay, I gotcha.
Slightly removed from the action. I wish we were right there in front of the studio.
Yeah.
That would have made it quite the experience for sure. So we actually kind of had that bird's eye view of the students just storming the court.
Yeah.
The surprising thing, though, was how much the typically very subtle, no-emotion media was. And I look over, we're on the far right table. All of the people in the middle tables were just having their phones out, taking pictures and video. Where is this disbelief even among, people paid to watch sports like this and cover sports like this? One of the best indicators was when Andrew Wagner, who is very funny, kind of sarcastic, but typically not the person to show joy at a sporting event. He was even trying to distract me afterwards. I figured, wow, if he's in a jolly mood, I think was how I described it in the broadcast, that says a lot about the overall excitement.
And Kellan, as a senior, you probably saw your time on campus a little slipping away a bit. Tell me what it's like for you to have one of these moments before your time is up at Marquette, and were you nervous that you weren't going to get the opportunity of something like this?
It was just incredible. I still look back on it, even though it was on Tuesday, almost a week ago, I still, look back, and I'm thankful as hell for this opportunity. That morning I wasn't scheduled to work the game. Neither John nor myself was.
Oh wow!
Assigned to the broadcast. So
what changed that? What was the turn of fate that changed that?
I was at work with our executive television producer Connor Bash, and he turns to me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do the radio call for the game tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I was going to be at the game anyway. Yeah, so it was kind of a spur of the moment type thing, but unbelievable experience, and really glad that they pulled out that win, and it was incredible to be a part of that.
I think about this frequently when I hear great calls and kind of big moments. Obviously, you want to let it breathe, and to a certain extent, and I think there's different schools of thought between the guys that are on this pod. We always joke about Jim Nance in a tradition like unlike any other, and all these other kind
hello
of
friends
and all these Gus Johnson type calls. Do you guys have particular play-by-play announcer or color commentary person that you try to mimic or that you look up to as you're kind of thinking about your approach to any call?
Mike Emmerich, without a doubt. I'm a big hockey fan right off the bat.
He's terrific.
I did a couple of Marquette games last weekend when they hosted Bradley. I was doing play-by-play for that, so that was fun. I just love how colorful his vocabulary is and how he can think of so many ways to describe the movement of the puck, and just eloquent, I think, would be a great way to describe it.
Yeah, Emmert's also one of those guys who you can tell cares about the game and is interested in it himself, and that comes across. John, what about you? Same question to you. What do you think?
Well, that's a really tough question. I would say there are kind of bits of different announcers that I try to get. I try to bring insight, like on Monday Night Football, John Gruden does a great job of that. I mean, it's hard to just name one announcer, though, when I've been growing up with so many excellent announcers, so it's hard to name just one.
Yeah. So kind of transitioning back to Marquette basketball, obviously in the time between the Villanova game and when we're recording this, Marquette took a tough home loss. Taking that loss to Providence at home into account, just from a student's perspective, not necessarily from your role in the media, what is the mood on campus right now among students, among staff that you run into? What's the mood about Marquette basketball? Is there a different feeling, or is it kind of still the same old that we started the season with?
Well, I would say that after Tuesday, there was definitely a lot of excitement. There wasn't a whole lot of excitement about Marquette basketball before that. I'd say that generated some interest. You also have, even with the Villanova game, there were people that left early. There were people that didn't go. But I went to a club for the first meeting on Thursday, and one of the kind of icebreaker questions was, did you storm the court? So having, which was a great question because it's interesting hearing different perspectives on that. But before that, it wasn't like Marquette basketball had necessarily that role on campus, with probably the most notable exception being the Wisconsin game, considering that's just such a big part of culture still. So I would say there's definitely a lot of excitement. Still, though, there could be better student turnout. I was going from a mentorship event to the game. So I was walking in. They actually kept me from going in until after introduction. And even with that, I was able to get pretty close to right behind the band.
It's an excellent point. You guys shouldn't have to deal with it. I've been on texts of, why isn't the student section bigger and why aren't they louder in the crowd? You answered it. Well, they got to put together sustained wins. And don't get me wrong, like the Villanova win is huge, but you confirm everyone's beliefs of wildly inconsistent, too young, not ready to win yet when you come back home and lose to Providence on Saturday. That's what happens. And for the three of us doing this podcast week in and week out, if you guys remember back to our freshman years, they had come off 2 seasons not making the NCAA tournament. They had lost to Western Michigan in the NIT, and the start of that 05-06 season, the building was half empty, and it took multiple big wins and beating Connecticut in the first game and upsetting Cincinnati, and then the building came back. You got to put multiple big wins together to have crowd engagement. I don't think that's an unfair ask.
And I don't think that it was just that. I mean, it was even like the secondary stuff, like having the T-shirts, the Duck Kids T-shirts. Jarrell, Dominique, and Wes were on the T-shirt, and like the marketing surrounding this great new recruiting class, and all of that together, helped the excitement. But
John and Kellan, I think you'd both agree. Obviously, for one of you being there for all 4 years, winning will fix everything. They rattle off 6 games in a row in the Big East. Like, people will be there. I think that's a pretty slam dunk.
I would have to agree to that 100%. I think a major problem with sports fans and a lot of society in general is people want instant gratification. It's like,
absolutely,
like if Marquette's not going to win, then I don't want to go. From a sports fan perspective, you can't blame them. Like being a Detroit Lions fan, it's like it's like when
oh jeez, yeah. Why in God's name did you have to dig that up? Oh.
Yeah, it's like when are they gonna pull something out and win? It sucks that they have to do it, but like you can't be up on Butler and then
absolutely
lead and then beat the best team in the country and then lose to Providence immediately after that. Like if you want a good solid fan base, you've got to be consistent. You've got to win.
And if the goal is to make the NCAA tournament this season, you can't do those things either. You got to beat Providence at home. The idea of them taking all 3 games, Butler, Creighton, and Villanova retrospectively, like it's great. They took 2 out of 3. I think nobody expected that, but you're right. You got to beat Providence. I want to buy into it. I want you guys to have a similar experience to it, because I will say we were fortunate. They were ranked every season we were in school there, and it really was it was a fun mood on campus. People looked forward to getting down there, and Pete, I think you said it on a previous pod where if you weren't there at least an hour before tip, you weren't sitting in the lower bowl, and if you got there at tip, you were going straight to the back row. And it's a great, and I'm sure that helped push the team. But again, since 2013, they haven't they haven't had that, and this is what you get. There's a little bit of apathy because they've struggled. That's just reality.
Mike, I just want to ask one more question. It's not necessarily related to basketball, but the overall sports scene at Marquette. Since the new Big East and everything and the adding of the lacrosse team, there's been some changes campus-wide and just the overall sports scene. Do students get excited about any of the other sports that are on campus? Like, I mean, women's basketball is doing pretty good this year. I know a few of the soccer teams have been good, and obviously the lacrosse team has had some success in its first few years. Are there other teams on campus that get the students excited and get them out for games?
I think the biggest thing that people are looking forward to is lacrosse. You know, NCAA tournament berth in one of their first years as an NCAA program. I mean, that's huge. That's a big step. I don't know if you guys watched the short documentary, Lucky to Win a Game, produced by a couple of our buddies. It's very good, very well made. And that was a great story kind of about the rise of Marquette lacrosse being a solid D1 lacrosse program in less than 5 years, which I think is an incredible feat. I think people are really excited to see where the lacrosse program goes from this point.
Yeah, I think that's testament to Marquette as a whole, how they put people in positions to succeed. But go ahead.
So to add on to that, the Lucky to Win a Game is actually making its web premiere, I believe, today on MarquetteWire.org. Then going back to what you were saying about women's basketball obviously having a lot of success, there hasn't really been much of a student turnout for that, considering the fact that they have a pretty good shot at winning the Big East. And it's not just this team that plays super slow. I mean, it's an up-tempo, fun-to-watch team. They'll get students, but they don't really have a student section necessarily. The band does a great job of creating some environment for the team. The other thing is this freshman class, they haven't really been seeing much winning so far, where my roommate didn't know until probably a few weeks ago where Valley Fields was. And while he is definitely in the minority, that definitely says a lot about, okay, first maybe people knowing where Valley Fields is will help.
Right,
and of course, it doesn't help that you have to go across the 16th Street Bridge.
It's amazing what happens when they put a new Sobelman's up on campus. Nobody has to walk down there anymore. Nobody has to walk down there.
Before we jump off, I want to give you each one more chance to say what you think might happen with Marquette men's basketball for the rest of the season, where you see the remainder of this season going. John, we'll start with you.
I think it's going to go down to a lot of three-point shooting. It's going to go down to Luke Fisher, where the stats I mentioned in the Villanova game, time they were 8-2 when Luke Fisher made at least 6 baskets. So I think if Luke Fisher continues to do what he did against Villanova, you saw it a little bit against Providence, but not nearly enough. Where I think if he can continue to do what he's been doing, Marquette's in a pretty good position. I'm kind of hoping for a Marquette Virginia Tech or a Marquette Indiana March Madness game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be the storyline would be unbelievable. I see him making the tournament. I don't see him being higher than maybe an 8 seed if they can get some things going their way.
Kellan, what about you?
That's kind of about, I think, best case scenario is an 8 seed. I mean, they've got 9 games left, and, you know, it's a very winnable schedule. They've got Xavier twice. They have Creighton to kind of end the regular season. And they also have Butler one more time. But I think Xavier is going to be a good contest, but I think they can pull that one out too. And, you know, without Mo Watson, Creighton's got some work to do, but I think that's going to be a lot closer matchup than what we saw last weekend. I think best case scenario, like I said earlier, is an 8 seed in the tournament. And going off of what John said, that would be unbelievable matchup, Indiana or Virginia. They've been due for a tournament berth, and I think this is the year.
All right, fellas. Well, thanks so much for that. Thanks so much for joining the Real Chili podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time to do so. We'll be listening in to the rest of your calls this season. Wish you good luck the rest of the way. And again, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys.
All right, folks, we are in the second half of this podcast. We just wanted to do a quick recap of the Providence game. A disappointing result no matter how you look at it. And really, I think it changes the perception of our wins against Villanova and our win against Creighton. Villanova had a historically bad shooting night. We caught Creighton at the perfect time. And against Providence, our offense almost overcame our bad defense. but not quite, and we lost by 1.
I think from the get-go, it was obvious that Marquette wasn't in rhythm. I thought there were some questionable calls in the beginning from refs just on out-of-bounds plays and whatnot that prevented us from getting in any rhythm because Providence really came out cold, and we weren't able to capitalize. I think it was like 4-2, 5 minutes into the game, and we were playing great defense at that point, I thought. We just weren't able to get any sort of rhythm going on offense, and I don't really know what that was a result of, but we really didn't click anywhere on offense until the second half we got going a little bit. And I know that we kind of want to blame the defense in certain situations, and I do think, obviously, there's always things that we can work on, but to me in this game, I would place blame on the offense. We just never really got it going. Marcus, even though not being in foul trouble, he never got the offense going in the first half, really. And I think that our team really feeds off of their offensive output as opposed to other teams who feed off their defense. If we're making shots, we're aggressive on defense and we're playing hard, and I just didn't see that from these guys.
We're still not good enough to take for granted DePaul and St. John's and Georgetown. Right, like this roster is not despite how deadly it can be from deep, and this season it's demonstrated a consistency in shooting from three. It wasn't, as we saw, there will be days where it's not there, and you got to find other ways to win. They can get beat by anybody if they are not at their best, and that's kind of the unfortunate world that we live in. I think it's safe to say our record. We are what our record says we are. This is pretty emblematic. We've had some lousy second half fall aparts. This wasn't one of those, but we just got beat. We did not play. Providence was better than us. We had a chance at the end, but Providence was better than us for the majority of that game.
I just think that it's interesting. I've been completely off on all my predictions throughout the year. I've just been friggin' awful.
Yeah, I mean, we were going to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Luckily, I haven't put any money on Marquette this year. Which is always a good idea, to never put money on Marquette.
Some of us can't say that so honestly.
But I think that throughout the season, I kind of had this assessment of Marquette that they are good against the teams that they're better than, and they're lesser than the teams that they shouldn't beat, like a Villanova, and that the teams that are, maybe more their caliber, it's a toss-up game. And I think over the last 3 games, I've been totally disproven in that, in our big wins over Creighton and Villanova, and near catastrophic loss to Providence here. Catastrophic happens in the next 2 games when we play St. John's and DePaul. If we lose those.
Oh boy.
But one thing that I mentioned earlier in the season is how we package this Big East season. And I was looking for a 6-2 mark against Villanova, St. John's, Providence, and DePaul. And we're still on track with that. We got that lucky or important win against Villanova to sort of absorb any potential losses to a Providence, St. John's, or DePaul. But now that margin of error has been eliminated with this loss to Providence. And we have to sweep St. John's and DePaul the rest of the way if we really want a chance to make the tournament.
Totally agree. I think, as you said, we're still on track to either make the tournament or be in good position here at the end of the Big East season. But when you make up ground against Creighton and Villanova and then lose it against Providence, that adds more pressure. We know how this team loses games. And so what can Wojo and the coaching staff do to fix those things? You saw it in the second half. Cartwright went off. A couple of their guys went off in the second half. And so what can the team do to batten down those hatches to make this second half of the Big East Conference season as strong as it needs to be to get us into a good tournament seed?
I think defensively they were, despite us sitting here kind of hammering them, I said a few pods ago that I think we're going to be giving up between around 80 points a game, and if we need our offense to produce about 80. If we're scoring between 83, 87 points, I think we give ourselves a pretty good chance. That was what we had talked about, and that kind of we didn't get there, and we lose a tough game. Talking end of game scenario from this one, with the fact that Reinhardt struggled from the floor. He's 3 for, at the time he was going 3 for 9 in those final 2 possessions. Were you surprised that he was the one with the ball in his hand to attempt the game-winning shot both times?
I think it was surprising that he got the ball both times, and maybe there was a read built in where there was a secondary guy coming off a screen that he could have gotten it to. It wasn't blatantly obvious to me that there was someone standing wide open that he ignored. I think, to me, the story is more about Wojo trying to solidify Caton as that go-to guy down the stretch. And I don't know how much that has to do with him believing he has the most ice in his veins, or how much it's messing with Marcus to say, hey, you're the man, but still as a freshman, you got to earn that right to take that last shot. Because I think, all of us would maybe kind of prefer Marcus to be the guy taking the last shot. But
Rousey played more minutes than Marcus again in this game. Obviously, and Rousey went nuts. He goes 10 for 10 from the line. It's 3 threes. He had 23 points. You can't say enough good things. But Marcus wasn't even on the floor for long stretches of this game to make a massive move. But you're right. At the end of the Mike, what do you like? End of game, it was interesting. Here was a clear opportunity. We had it against Villanova. They went to Reinhardt again. He got fouled, and they did it again in this game where he had the ball in his hands for the last possession. Is that something we're all fully comfortable with? And I guess is there somebody else we'd rather see take it? I think it probably is him.
I don't think it was the worst shot. I don't know who in this game had a hotter hand. You just mentioned Rousey.
He's 5 feet tall. You can't rely on him to take the final shot. You just can't.
Yeah, you can't.
Right. And he had done a good job earlier in the game of getting to the line and getting into the hole, I should say. But I have no problem with going to Caton. And I don't think it wasn't a great shot, but
No, they were both decent looks. It wasn't like they were crazy off-balance shots.
He was right there. It was right there.
Yeah. Oh, no, we could be talking about a buzzer victory very easily.
Right, exactly.
Had one of those come down, and we would have a whole different tone of, God, they pulled it out. They weren't playing well. You're that close. It was a big difference, and because he had a decent game with Fisher, had a double-double with 13 and 10, but it hurts to have him foul out, and he's not an option in the last 2 minutes of the game. Yeah. Granted, that group in the last 2 minutes got them to that point where they had a chance to win it, but it would have been nice to have a 6'11" guy to potentially throw the ball to on the block, to either draw a foul or get a shot
Set
off.
A screen.
Right. So, I mean, that
carve out some space.
That hurt on that final possession, or get a tip in. Like it hurt not having him out there for that final play. Not saying it necessarily goes any different, but that's a massive hole. But look, two guys had tough shooting days. Hauser was 3 for 10. Reinhardt was 3 for 11 for the end of the game, and we lost by 1. Like those guys usually make 1 or 2 more shots. There's your difference in the game.
And some of Providence's shots, like I almost wanted to throw up looking at some of their form, but they were splashing threes, and it was like, ugh, these are the guys that are beating us in this game. It was kind of depressing.
That's gonna happen though. They went 11 for 20 from deep, and that'll and again, you were right there at the end, and you had a chance. It's not like we got our doors blown off because they went 11 for 20 from 3. We out-rebounded them, which was great. I mean, again, this was kind of the game. I thought this was going to be a very tight game. I think I predicted we'd win by 3. I thought we'd pull it out, but we didn't make the plays down the stretch. We actually made plays to give ourselves a chance, but they hurt us enough to where we didn't do it. And you're right, it's a tough one to swallow. They got to move on, have short-term memory. And I'll allude to something that we talked about with the Marquette Radio guys who were on. They need to string together wins to guarantee fan interest and excitement going forward, because this is what can kind of create the apathetic attitude that Wojo has. He'll never say it directly, but he said, our fans are so great when they're here and we need more fans. Like, well, this is not North Carolina where they're showing up, or Indiana or Duke where they're just going to walk in the door regardless of who's in the uniform. If you and I are out there playing, like, this is a fan base that for 3 years the team has struggled. You're right there on the edge. Beating Creighton and Villanova are huge. Don't come back on your next home game and fall to Providence. They got 2 big road games. So St. John's, DePaul. They got to win them. They have to win them.
The silver lining for me, we looked confident that we were going to come back throughout the game. And I think as a fan, I kind of felt that way for the first time in a long time about Marquette, which is a marked difference from the last 2 to 3 seasons when you didn't have any of that believe in yourself mentality. And I think it really bit them here. It was more of an arrogance thing. Hey, we just beat Creighton and Villanova. We can roll out the barrel against Providence and no problem. We'll just rely on our shooting and get the dub. And they didn't. And I think that's a good lesson for them. The positive thing is that they actually believe in themselves enough to have a letdown game.
Marquette next plays at St. John's this Wednesday, February 1st. Following that up with a road trip to DePaul on Saturday, February 4th. We will be here, of course, to get you through it all. Wins, hopefully not losses. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Real Chili Podcast. Signing off for Brian Henry and Pete Mohan. I'm Mike Lavender. We'll talk to you next time.